There's a stretch of I-40 outside Amarillo where the land gets so flat you can see the curve of the earth. I drove it once, years ago, in a pickup truck with bad shocks and a radio that only picked up AM stations. And somewhere around mile marker 60, with nothing but grass and sky and the hum of the engine, I had a thought that I've never been able to shake. This highway was built by people who believed that the point of a road was the driving, not the destination, not the cargo, the act of moving through the world with your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the horizon and the knowledge that if you fell asleep, you'd die. That was the contract. You stayed awake, and the road took you somewhere. Nobody drives the long haul anymore. The trucks still run, the cargo still moves, but the contract is different now, and I'm not sure anyone read the fine print. My name is Margot Calloway, and you're listening to Signals. Tonight's transmission comes from a town you've never heard of, where a man named Marcus Cole serves brisket from a truck called Last Mile, and every plate comes with a story about the night the highway said goodbye. Sleep well, and if you can't, well, that's what I'm here for. The smoke was wrong. Marcus Cole knew it the way a pianist knows a flat note, the way a mother knows a fake cough. 45 minutes into the cook, and the thin blue ribbon curling from the offset smoker had turned white and lazy, which meant the fire had shifted, which meant the pecan wood had probably split and fallen against the baffle, which meant he had about 6 minutes before his brisket went from transcendent to acceptable, and Marcus Cole did not serve acceptable brisket. He set down his coffee, wiped his hands on the rag he kept slung over his left shoulder like a uniform, and opened the firebox. Sure enough, the split log had tumbled, redirecting airflow. He repositioned it with his bare hands, calloused enough that the heat barely registered. And within a minute, the smoke thinned, blued, sweetened. "There you go," he said, to the brisket, to the fire, to nobody. It was 5:47 in the morning in Braden, Arkansas. Population, 412 if you counted the Petersons, who technically lived a half-mile outside the town line, but showed up at every meeting. The sun hadn't cleared the tree line yet, but the sky to the east had gone from black to that particular shade of bruised purple that Marcus associated with honesty. Night was a liar, too dark to see what was real, and noon was a show-off, too bright, bleaching everything flat. But this hour, this in-between, showed you the world exactly as it was, tired, cold, and worth getting up for. Marcus had been awake since 4. He was always awake by 4. 18 years of long-haul trucking had permanently reset his internal clock to what his ex-wife Denise called trucker time, which was any hour that normal humans associated with insomnia or punishment. The habit had outlasted the career by 5 years. Some mornings he resented it. Most mornings he used it. The food truck, Last Mile BBQ, painted on the side in letters that his buddy Jerome had done for free because Jerome owed Marcus a favor from 2031 that neither of them discussed in polite company, sat in the gravel lot next to the old Texaco station that hadn't sold gas since 2035. Marcus had an arrangement with the owner, Miss Della, who was 86 and owned half the commercial property in Braden, and charged him $200 a month for the spot, which was either a steal or a con, depending on how many customers showed up. On a good day, he'd serve 60 plates. On a bad day, 20. On a day when the autonomous freight corridor on I-40 was running heavy, which was most days now, the big rigs sailing past in silent convoys, no drivers, no stops, no reason to pull off at a town like Braden, he'd serve maybe 15. The trucks didn't stop. That was the thing. They didn't need gas, didn't need food, didn't need a bathroom or a bad cup of coffee or a conversation with a stranger that turned out to be the best part of the day. They just drove, perfectly, endlessly, through the towns that used to survive on the stopping. Marcus poured another cup of coffee and leaned against the truck. The sky was brightening. A cardinal was going crazy in the hackberry tree. Somewhere down on Braden's single commercial street, Miss Della's cat was probably terrorizing a squirrel. 5 years, he said to the cardinal. 5 years I've been out here talking to birds. The cardinal did not respond. Marcus respected that about cardinals. No small talk. He'd been 23 when he got his CDL. Summer of 2020, the world upside down with plague, everyone locked inside, and Marcus, who had just dropped out of the University of Memphis 2 credits short of a history degree because he couldn't sit still long enough to write a thesis on Reconstruction-era land reform, saw an ad for a trucking company hiring in West Memphis and thought, that's a job where the sitting moves. His mother, Evelyn, had opinions. Evelyn Cole had opinions the way the Mississippi had water, constantly, in enormous volume, with the occasional flood. "A truck driver," she said, standing in the kitchen of the house on Gill Street, holding a wooden spoon like a judge holds a gavel. "My son, who could teach history, who could change minds, who could be somebody, wants to drive a truck. I'd be somebody who drives a truck. Marcus Aurelius Cole, I did not name you after a Roman emperor so you could haul frozen chicken across Arkansas. The emperor was a Stoic, Mama. Stoics believe in doing useful work without complaining. Are you calling me a complainer? I would never." She'd pointed the spoon at him. "You come home for Christmas. Every Christmas. I don't care if you're hauling frozen chicken to Alaska. It was a general example. I don't know what I'll be hauling. Christmas, Marcus. Christmas, Mama." He'd kept that promise for 13 years, every Christmas, no matter what. Once he'd driven 14 hours straight from Boise to Memphis to make it by midnight, running on gas station coffee and an audiobook about the fall of Rome that he'd listened to twice because the narrator's voice reminded him of his grandfather. He'd pulled into the driveway at 11:42 p.m., smelling like diesel and beef jerky, and his mother had opened the door before he knocked because she'd been watching from the window since 9, and she'd said, "You look terrible. Eat something." Those were the years, the real years. Memphis to Albuquerque to Flagstaff to Barstow to Memphis again. I-40 was his backbone, the route he drove most often, the one that felt like home in a way that a house never quite did. He knew every truck stop, every way station, every stretch where the sunset did something unreasonable to the sky. He knew where to get the best pie in Oklahoma, Jimbo's, Exit 178, Blackberry, don't bother with the pecan. He knew where the speed traps were in the Texas Panhandle. He knew the sound his rig made when the wind came off the mesas near Gallup at exactly the right angle. A low, harmonic moan, almost musical, like the truck was singing. He'd driven 3 million miles. He'd counted. The first customers arrived at 11. The Bickle brothers, Ray and Donnie, who ran the hardware store and who ordered the same thing every time. 2 meat plate, brisket and ribs, extra pickles, white bread, sweet tea, and who argued about the same things every time, which was whether the Cowboys would ever win another Super Bowl. Ray said yes, Donnie said not in our lifetime. Marcus privately agreed with Donnie but kept that to himself because Ray was a generous tipper. "Marcus, settle something for us," Ray said, sliding onto the picnic bench Marcus had built from salvaged lumber. "I will not. The autonomous rigs. Donnie says they're quieter than the old trucks. I say they're louder." Marcus considered this while he sliced brisket. The knife, a 12-inch Victorinox he'd bought in 2034 with the severance money, the one extravagant purchase he'd made, moved through the meat with the sound that good brisket makes when it's right. A whisper, not a tear. "They're neither," Marcus said. "They're a different kind of sound. Old trucks had engines, combustion, growl. You felt it in your chest. The autonomous ones, they're electric. So what you hear is the tires and the air displacement. It's a whoosh, like a ghost going somewhere important." "A ghost going somewhere important," Ray repeated. "Donnie, write that down. That's poetry." "I'm not writing anything down. I'm eating ribs." Marcus served them their plates and their tea and let them argue, which was their form of love. He'd learned that from the road, that most of what people called conflict was actually closeness conducted at high volume. The lunch rush, such as it was, came and went. 28 plates. Not bad for a Wednesday. Marcus cleaned the service window, restocked the napkins, and did the thing he always did during the lull between lunch and the late afternoon stragglers. He sat in the cab of the food truck and looked at his phone. Not at the internet, not at the news. He looked at one specific thing, a photograph saved to his home screen that he'd taken on November 14th, 2033. The last night. The photo showed the dashboard of his Kenworth T680 taken from the driver's seat at 11:47 p.m. The headlights cut through darkness. The road ahead was I-40, just past the Arkansas-Oklahoma border, and in the distance, barely visible, were the running lights of other trucks, other human-driven trucks, all making the same run, all aware that this was it. The Autonomous Freight Transition Act had passed 7 months earlier. The deadline was midnight, November 15th, 2033. After that, no human-operated commercial freight vehicle over 10,000 pounds would be permitted on the interstate highway system between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. The night hours, the truckers' hours, the hours when the road belonged to the big rigs and the sky was a planetarium and the CB radio crackled with voices from Alabama and Montana and everywhere in between, were being handed over to the machines. The day hours came 6 months later. By May of 2034, it was done. The autonomous convoys owned the interstates. The human drivers were offered retraining programs, mostly in warehouse logistics, which was like offering a sailor a job in a bathtub, or severance packages that amounted to roughly 6 months of salary and a letter from the Department of Transportation thanking them for their service, which Marcus had framed and hung in his truck as a joke until it stopped being funny, which took about a week. But the night, that last night. He'd picked up his load in West Memphis at 6 p.m. A standard run, 40,000 pounds of consumer goods bound for an Oklahoma City distribution center. A run he'd made 100 times. The dispatcher, a woman named Charlene who'd been routing drivers for 20 years, had called him personally, which she never did. "You want the last run, Marcus? Somebody's got to do it. It doesn't have to be you." "Yeah, Charlene, it does." He'd said it lightly, but he'd meant it the way you mean anything that matters, all the way down. The evening was clear and cold. November in the Delta, the air sharp with the ghost of burned cotton stalks from harvest. He pulled out of the yard at 6:18, merged onto I-40 West, and felt the familiar shudder of the rig finding its rhythm. The engine settling, the tires finding their groove, the whole 18-wheeled organism coming alive the way it only did on the open road. His CB was on, Channel 19, the old trucker's channel, and tonight it was busy in a way it hadn't been in years. Voices from everywhere. Drivers who'd come out for the last run the way you come out for a funeral. Not because you want to, but because not showing up would be worse. "This is Possum, southbound on I-55, just crossed into Arkansas. Any other last nighters out there?" "Big ticket here, westbound I-40, passing through Forest City. Got my whole family on the phone. Wife's crying. I'm not crying. I'm definitely not crying. Midnight Mama coming at you from Tulsa. Heading east to meet y'all halfway. 31 years on the road. Tonight's the last dance, boys." Marcus keyed his mic. "Last mile westbound, just cleared West Memphis. 40,000 pounds of I don't even know what. Doesn't matter. It's the carrying that counts." "Last mile. Marcus, that you?" "It's me, Possum." "Man, I was hoping you'd be out here. You owe me $20 from that poker game in Tucumcari." "I owe you nothing. You dealt from the bottom." That's a vicious accusation. It's a factual statement. Laughter on the channel. Real laughter. The kind that comes from people who know each other only by voice and handle and the shared understanding of what it means to keep the world's freight moving through the dark. Marcus had met Possum once at a truck stop in Gallup in 2028, a skinny white guy from Alabama with a beard like a biblical prophet and a tattoo of a possum on his right forearm that looked more like a rat. They'd shared a plate of chicken fried steak and talked for 2 hours about their kids, their roots, and whether the Oxford comma mattered. Marcus said yes, Possum said no, which told Marcus everything he needed to know about Alabama's education system. The miles passed. Little Rock, Conway, Russellville. The truck stops were lit up like Christmas, full of drivers who'd pulled over just to be near each other, to stand in parking lots drinking coffee from styrofoam cups and watching the rigs roll past. Some of them were honking, long, sustained blasts that echoed off the overpasses and sounded like mourning. At 9:30, Marcus pulled into the Loves in Alma for his last fuel stop. He didn't need fuel. He had enough to make Oklahoma City. But he wanted to stop. He wanted to stand on the concrete and feel the vibration of the trucks coming through the ground and smell the diesel, which smelled like work, like purpose, like the particular brand of freedom that only people who've traded comfort for motion understand. The lot was full, not with autonomous rigs preparing for their midnight takeover. Those were staged at depots, waiting, patient, utterly indifferent to ceremony. The lot was full of human drivers, dozens of them, standing around, leaning on their rigs, some with their families, some alone. A woman Marcus didn't know, 50-ish, short hair, Schneider jacket, walked up to him and said, "You Marcus, last mile?" "That's me. I'm Midnight Mama. I know your voice." 31 years, she said. She was smiling, and her eyes were wet. "Started in EO2, back when they said a woman couldn't drive a rig. I said, watch me." And they watched. And here we are. She stuck out her hand. Marcus shook it. Her grip was trucker strong, the kind of handshake that came from years of wrestling fifth wheels and tire irons. "Where you headed after?" she asked. "I don't know yet. Might open a food truck." "A food truck? I make a decent brisket." "Honey, decent isn't gonna cut it." "Fine, I make a transcendent brisket." Midnight. Mama laughed. "There it is. That's the confidence of a man who's driven 3 million miles and never once jackknifed." "I jackknifed once, 2026, black ice outside Flagstaff, slid into a ditch and sat there for 2 hours waiting for a tow. Listened to an entire podcast about the Byzantine Empire." "Learn anything?" "Yeah. Don't drive on black ice." He pulled out of Alma at 10:15. The border crossing into Oklahoma was quiet. No way station tonight, the inspectors having apparently decided that some things were more important than checking load limits. The road ahead was dark and straight, and his for another hour and 45 minutes. The CB had gone mostly quiet. The jokes and stories had wound down, replaced by the thing that comes after. The heavy, companionable silence of people who've said what they needed to say and are now just breathing together. Every few minutes, someone would key up and say something small. "Nice night for a drive." "Sure is. See y'all on the other side." Marcus drove. He drove the way he always drove. Steady, alert, hands at 10 and 2, eyes scanning the mirrors and the road ahead with the automatic vigilance of a man who understood that the cargo behind him was someone's livelihood, someone's Christmas present, someone's medication. He'd never taken that lightly. Every load was a promise. I will get this where it needs to go. The autonomous rigs understood the physics of that promise. They would deliver the cargo faster, safer, more efficiently. They would never fall asleep, never misjudge a merge, never get distracted by a sunset over the Ozarks that was so beautiful it made you forget, for half a second, that you were working. But they would never make the promise. A promise requires someone to break it. That's what gives it weight. At 11:50 p.m., 10 minutes before the deadline, Marcus was on I-40 just west of Salisaw. The sky was enormous, no clouds, no moon, just stars scattered across the black like someone had knocked over a jar of them. His headlights were the only light for miles. In the rear view, he could see one more set of headlights, another human driver making the same run, and he flashed his lights twice in the old trucker's greeting. The lights behind him flashed back. At 11:55, the CB came alive one more time. It was Possum. 5 minutes, y'all. Silence. "I just want to say, look, I ain't good at this, but driving with y'all all these years, it was the best thing I ever did. Better than my marriage, and I love my wife, so don't tell her I said that. Marcus keyed his mic. His throat was tight. Last mile here. I don't have a speech. I got a Kenworth and 40,000 pounds and about 4 minutes left. So I'm going to do what I've always done. I'm going to drive. Drive, brother! At 11:58, a sound started. Faint at first, then building. Air horns. From every direction, from the trucks ahead, the trucks behind, the trucks at the rest stops, and the fuel stations and the depots. A chorus of air horns that rolled across the Oklahoma night like thunder from a clear sky. Marcus hit his horn. He leaned on it. The sound was enormous, physical, a vibration that went through the steering wheel and up his arms and into his chest, where it became something that wasn't sound anymore but feeling. Grief and pride and gratitude and the particular ache of being the last of something. At midnight, he pulled onto the shoulder. He put the truck in park. He turned off the engine. He sat in the dark and listened to the air horns fade, one by one, until the last one died, and the only sound was the tick of the cooling engine and the wind moving through the grass on the median and his own breathing. He sat there for a long time. Then he took the photograph. Marcus. He looked up from the phone. A girl, 19, maybe 20, was standing at the service window of the food truck. He hadn't heard her walk up, which meant he'd been further into the memory than he'd realized. That happened sometimes. The past wasn't a place you visited. It was a current that pulled you in. Sorry, sweetheart. What can I get you? Is this the last mile truck? Like the famous one? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Famous might be a strong word. My dad was a trucker. He talked about you. He said you were the last guy on I-40. Marcus studied her face. What's your dad's name? Jim Ritter. He drove for Werner. Big Jim, tall guy, always wore a Cardinals hat even though he was from Kansas. Her eyes went bright. That's him. I know Big Jim. Haven't heard from him in a while, though. How's he doing? Something shifted in her face. A small weather system, clouds moving across sun. He passed, last year, heart attack. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He wiped his hands on the rag and leaned on the counter with both arms, the way you lean towards someone when what you're about to say matters. Your daddy was a good driver and a better man. He pulled over once to help me change a tire in a rainstorm outside Tucumcari when he could have just kept going. Nobody would have blamed him, but he stopped. That's the kind of thing that tells you who somebody is. The girl's chin trembled, barely. She was trying to hold it. What's your name? Marcus asked. Katie. Katie, you want a plate? On the house. Your daddy's money is no good here. She laughed, which was what he'd been going for. A laugh is a bridge. It gets you from the hard thing to the next thing. He made her a plate. Brisket, sausage, slaw, white bread, pickles. The plate he would have made Big Jim. He carried it to the picnic bench and sat across from her while she ate, because that was the other part of the job. Not just the food, but the sitting. This is amazing, she said, through a mouthful of brisket. Your daddy would have said it needed more pepper. He would have. He put pepper on everything. Mom said he'd put pepper on ice cream if you let him. He absolutely would have. And then he'd have told you it was good. They sat in the fading afternoon light. A convoy of autonomous trucks passed on I-40, a quarter mile away, silent, synchronized, aerodynamically perfect, carrying things that people needed from places that had them to places that didn't. The trucks did not honk. They had no one to honk for. Can I ask you something? Katie said. Shoot. Do you miss it? Marcus looked at the highway, the question everybody asked, and nobody wanted the real answer to, because the real answer was complicated and people preferred clean stories. Hero trucker, stolen career, noble exile. The real answer didn't fit on a bumper sticker. I miss the version of myself that did it, he said. Out there, I knew exactly who I was. I was the guy who got the thing from here to there. Simple, important, clear. Now I'm the guy who makes brisket in a town most people drive past, and I love it. I genuinely love it. But it's a different kind of knowing. Smaller, quieter. Some days that's enough. Some days I look at that highway and I feel like a ghost watching the living. Katie put down her fork. My dad said almost exactly the same thing. He said, "I used to be the road, now I'm just the shoulder." Marcus felt that land in his chest. Big Jim said that? Yeah. Your daddy was a poet and he didn't even know it. Oh, he knew it. He just pretended he didn't because he thought it was embarrassing. Marcus laughed. A real one, from the belly, the kind that surprises you. He laughed and Katie laughed, and for a moment the grief and the absence and the relentless forward motion of a world that had decided it didn't need people like Big Jim Ritter or Marcus Cole or Midnight Mama or Possum or any of the 3.5 million Americans who used to drive for a living. For a moment, all of that was just background noise, and the foreground was two people sitting at a picnic bench eating good food in the late light of a Wednesday in Arkansas. Katie left at 5:30. She took a selfie with Marcus in front of the truck, which she said she was going to send to her mom, and Marcus said, "Good. Tell your mama Marcus Cole says hello and that Big Jim still owes him a poker debt from Tucumcari." He cleaned up, scrubbed the cutting board, emptied the grease trap, wrapped the leftover brisket in butcher paper for Miss Della, who'd come by at 7 the way she always did, moving slow in her housecoat and slippers, accepting the food as if she were doing Marcus a favor by eating it, which, in a way, she was. At 6, he did the thing he did every evening. He climbed into the cab of the food truck, not the service window side, the driving side, and he sat behind the wheel. The truck didn't go anywhere. It hadn't moved in 8 months. The engine worked fine, but Marcus didn't drive it. He had a spot. The spot was good. Moving would mean finding a new spot, and new spots were for people who hadn't found their place yet. But he sat behind the wheel every evening, because the wheel was the shape his hands knew, the curve that meant purpose, and some rituals aren't about function. They're about remembering. He turned on the radio, an AM station out of Fort Smith that played country so old it was almost blues, a man singing about a highway that went on forever. Marcus listened and watched the sky do its evening performance, purple to orange to that deep, deep blue that exists only in the minutes before dark, the color that has no name in English but probably has one in every language spoken by people who work outside. His phone buzzed, a text from Denise. "Marcus, Jalen's science fair is Thursday. Please don't forget. He's presenting on friction. I know you have opinions about friction." He typed back, "Tell my son that friction is the most important force in the universe. Without friction, nothing stays where you put it. I will be there Thursday. I will bring brisket. Don't bring brisket to a science fair. I'm bringing brisket to a science fair. You're impossible, and yet here I am, possible as hell." He could see her laughing through the phone. 15 years of marriage, 5 years of divorce, and he could still make Denise laugh through a text message. That was its own kind of driving, navigating the distance between two people who loved each other differently than they used to, but no less than they ever did. The dark came. The autonomous convoys increased their frequency after sundown. The night was theirs now, officially, legally. The hours that used to belong to human drivers ceded to machines that could see in infrared and react in milliseconds and never ever pull over to look at the stars. Marcus looked at the stars. He looked at them every night, from this gravel lot next to a dead gas station in a town that was slowly, gently disappearing. He looked at them the way he'd looked at them from the cab of his Kenworth on 1,000 nights. Not with wonder, exactly, but with recognition, an acknowledgement between old friends. He thought about Big Jim. He thought about Midnight Mama, who'd moved to Florida and started a charter fishing business. He thought about Possum, who was driving a school bus in Mobile now and said it was the same job, but slower and louder. He thought about Charlene the dispatcher, retired in Branson. He thought about the millions of miles, the millions of loads, the millions of small human decisions, Slow down for the ice, speed up for the merge, pull over for the driver with the flat tire. Keep going when you're tired because the cargo matters. Stop when you're dangerous because the cargo isn't worth dying for. All that accumulated human judgment, all that earned wisdom, replaced by censors that had never been wrong and never been kind. He locked up the truck. He walked to his car, a 2029 Honda that drove itself, but that Marcus always drove manually because some arguments you make with your whole body. The drive home was 12 minutes through streets so quiet he could hear the cicadas. His apartment was above the old pharmacy, 2 rooms and a kitchen, and it smelled like smoke because everything Marcus owned smelled like smoke, and he'd stopped apologizing for it. He set his alarm for 4. He brushed his teeth. He got into bed. On the nightstand, the photograph, the dashboard of a Kenworth T680 at 11:47 p.m. on November 14th, 2033. The headlights reaching into the dark, the road going on and on and on. Marcus closed his eyes. Behind them, the highway unspooled like it always did. Infinite, dark, his. The engine hummed. The CB crackled with voices. Somewhere ahead, the next mile waited, and the mile after that, and the mile after that, forever, the way it was supposed to be, the way it was before the machines learned the route, and the humans learned the shoulder, and the road kept going without either of them, because roads don't care who drives them, they just go. But Marcus cared. He cared about every mile. And in the morning, he'd wake up before the sun, and he'd build a fire, and he'd cook meat over wood the way humans had done for 100,000 years, and he'd serve it to whoever showed up, and he'd tell them stories about the highway, and the stories would keep the miles alive long after the last driver was gone. That was the last mile, not a distance, a person, someone who keeps going. I got a plate from Last Mile once. I was driving through Arkansas. Yes, I still drive, manually, and yes, I know that makes me a dinosaur, and no, I don't care. And I saw the truck parked by the old Texaco, and I pulled over because the smoke smelled like an honest-to-God promise. Marcus served me brisket and slaw and sweet tea and told me about the night the horns blew on I-40. And I thought, we spend so much time talking about what the machines took. Maybe we should spend a little more time talking about what the people kept. Their hands, their stories, their stubborn, irrational, beautiful insistence on doing things the hard way, not because it's better, but because it's theirs. This has been Signals. I'm Margot Calloway, broadcasting from Marfa, Texas, where the highway still runs past my window and the trucks still hum through the night. They don't stop here, but I stay up and watch them anyway. Sleep well, and if you can't, well, that's what I'm here for. If you'd like to receive the next transmission, subscribe. New Signals arrive weekly. And tell a friend who can't sleep. We'll leave the light on.